I still remember the day I walked into the sheriff's office for the first time, a mix of excitement and nerves swirling in my chest. It was a typical morning in late summer, the sun casting a warm glow over the parking lot as I stepped out of my truck. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my decision to pursue a career in law enforcement. I'd always been drawn to the idea of serving my community, of making a difference in people's lives. As I pushed open the door, a bell above it rang out, announcing my arrival. The reception area was tidy, with a few chairs lined up against the wall and a large wooden desk at the far end. A friendly-looking woman with a kind smile looked up from her computer, her eyes crinkling at the corners as she took in my eager expression. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice warm and welcoming. "I'm here to apply for a deputy position," I replied, trying to sound confident despite the butterflies in my stomach. She nodded, gesturing to a chair. "Have a seat, please. I'll get the application packet for you." I sat down, my eyes taking in the details of the office. The smell of fresh coffee wafted from the break room, mingling with the scent of worn leather and the faint tang of disinfectant. The sounds of keyboards clacking and muted conversations drifted from the adjacent rooms, creating a sense of bustling activity. As I filled out the application, I couldn't help but think about all the reasons I wanted to become a deputy. I wanted to make a difference, to help people on their worst days. I wanted to be part of a community that relied on each other, that looked out for one another. And, if I'm being honest, I wanted the sense of pride that came with wearing the badge. The woman, whose name tag read Deb, took my application and smiled. "We'll be in touch soon," she said, her eyes sparkling with encouragement. I left the office that day feeling hopeful, the seed of a dream taking root in my chest. Little did I know, it was just the beginning of a journey that would take me to the darkest corners of humanity and back again. I remember that fateful night like it was yesterday. It was a crisp autumn evening, the kind that made you want to roll down your window and take a deep breath of the cool air. I was patrolling the rural stretch of Power Line Road, the headlights of my cruiser casting an eerie glow on the deserted pavement. The radio crackled with the occasional dispatch, but otherwise, it was a quiet night. That's when the call came in, a 10 to 50, a fatal collision at the intersection of Power Line and Snell Creek Road. My heart sank, knowing that this wasn't going to be a routine stop. I hit the lights and sirens, my adrenaline spiking as I sped towards the scene. As I approached the intersection, I could see the wreckage, a mangled mess of twisted metal and shattered glass. The vehicles almost unrecognizable. I pulled up, my training taking over as I assessed the situation. The smell of gasoline and burned rubber hung heavy in the air, and I could hear the sound of groaning metal, the creaks and groans of the crushed vehicles. I got out of my cruiser, my boots crunching on the gravel as I made my way towards the wreckage. The first thing that struck me was the silence. There was no screaming, no crying, just an unsettling quiet. I knew that was never a good sign. As I approached the vehicles, I saw the damage. A sedan, crushed like a tin can. The roof caved in, the doors twisted off their hinges. A pickup truck, its bed crumpled, the windshield shattered. I could see the outline of a body, slumped over the steering wheel of the sedan. My gut told me it was bad, real bad. I took a deep breath, trying to process what I was seeing. My training kicked in, and I began to survey the scene, looking for any signs of survivors. But deep down, I knew it was too late. This was a fatal collision, and I was the first responder. The weight of that responsibility settled heavy on my shoulders as I began to secure the scene, my mind racing with the what-ifs and the could-haves. I stepped out of my cruiser, the crunch of gravel beneath my boots echoing through the stillness of the rural morning. The sun was slowly rising over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the scene before me. A call about a possible homicide had brought me to this secluded farmhouse on the outskirts of town. As I approached the house, I could feel the weight of the situation settling in. The air was heavy with an eerie silence, broken only by the distant chirping of birds. I took a deep breath, mentally preparing myself for what I was about to see. My eyes scanned the property, taking in the overgrown lawn, the rusty old truck parked haphazardly, and the faded mailbox with the name Jenkins scribbled in faded letters. I made my way to the front door, my hand resting on the grip of my gun, a habit born from years of experience. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and I stepped inside, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. The smell of stale air and decay hit me like a punch to the gut. The first thing I noticed was the body, lying on the living room floor. A middle-aged man, dressed in worn jeans and a faded flannel shirt, his eyes frozen in a permanent stare. I felt a familiar sense of detachment wash over me, a coping mechanism that allowed me to do my job. I began to survey the room, taking in the scattered furniture, the overturned coffee table, and the shattered remains of a vase. It looked like a struggle had taken place, but I knew better than to jump to conclusions. I took a deep breath, mentally preparing myself for the long road ahead. I pulled out my notebook and began to scribble down notes, my mind racing with questions. Who was this man? What had happened here? And who could have done this? As I began to process the scene, I knew that the key to unraveling this mystery lay in the people who had been closest to the victim. I made a mental note to speak with the family members, the neighbors, and anyone else who might have information. The investigation was just beginning, and I was ready to dig in. I remember the day Mendez walked into the station, his eyes sunken, his usual swagger nowhere to be found. He was a known player in the local underworld, always managed to stay one step ahead of us. But something was different this time. He seemed broken. As he sat across from me, I could smell the sweat and desperation emanating from him. He fidgeted, avoiding eye contact, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't do it, deputy. I swear on my mother's grave, I didn't kill those people. I've heard it all before, of course. The denials, the pleas, the lies. But there was something about Mendez's tone, his body language, that told me he was telling the truth. At least, he believed he was. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers together, and let him talk. He spilled his guts, telling me about the setup, the fake meat, the ambush. I listened intently, my mind racing with the implications. The more he spoke, the more I realized we'd been played. The evidence, the eyewitness accounts, it was all a carefully constructed web of deceit. I felt a growing sense of unease, my gut telling me we'd been chasing the wrong guy all along. As Mendez finished his story, I made a mental note to review the case files, to re-interview the witnesses. The truth was out there, hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. I could feel it. I looked Mendez straight in the eye, my tone firm but measured. I believe you, Mendez. But I need you to understand, we've got a lot of work to do to clear your name. Are you ready to cooperate fully? He nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was willing to dig deep, to follow the trail wherever it led. The truth was out there, and I was damn well going to find it. I recall the day we finally got the charges filed against the suspect. It was a mix of relief and frustration, knowing that justice was one step closer, but also aware of the long road ahead. As I sat at my desk, filling out the paperwork, I couldn't help but think about the victims and their families. The weight of their stories, the pain they'd endured, it was all still fresh in my mind. The DA's office had decided to go for the maximum, multiple counts of armed robbery, aggravated assault, and attempted murder. I nodded to myself as I read through the list, feeling a sense of satisfaction that we'd managed to build a solid case. The suspect's smug expression during the arrest still lingered in my memory, but now, with these charges, he'd be facing some serious time. As I signed the last page, a faint scent of fresh coffee wafted from the break room, transporting me back to the countless late nights spent working on this case. The exhaustion, the doubts, the moments of sheer terror, it was all worth it, I told myself. The enhanced sentencing was a crucial part of the prosecution's strategy. Given the suspect's prior record and the brutality of the crimes, we were pushing for the maximum penalty. I visualized the courtroom, the judge's stern face, the jury's solemn expressions. It was going to be a tough road ahead, but I was confident in our case. As I handed the paperwork to the DA, our eyes met, and I knew we shared the same unspoken thought. Justice would be served. The weight of the badge on my chest felt heavier, a reminder of the responsibility that came with upholding the law. I took a deep breath, letting the calm, steady rhythm of my heartbeat steady me. This was just the beginning, but I was ready for whatever came next. I remember the day like it was yesterday. A routine traffic stop on a crisp autumn morning. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the desert landscape. I pulled over a worn-out sedan for a busted taillight, nothing out of the ordinary. The driver, a young man in his early 20s, handed me his license and registration with a nervous smile. As I ran his info, my dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. "Deputy, we have a hit on the license." Ice hold. My gut told me this was about to get complicated. I approached the driver, trying to appear non-threatening, and asked him to step out of the vehicle. He complied, his eyes darting back and forth like a trapped animal. I cuffed him and read him his rights, all the while thinking about the can of worms we were about to open. He was undocumented, and now he was in our custody. I couldn't help but wonder what his story was, what drove him to leave his home, his family, and risk everything for a better life in the States. As I searched the vehicle, I found a faded photograph of a young woman and two small children, likely his family. My mind wandered to the consequences of his actions. Would he be deported? Would his family be left behind, struggling to make ends meet? The weight of it all settled heavy on my shoulders. I radioed for backup, and soon the scene was swarming with agents from Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They took him into custody, leaving me to wonder what the future held for this young man and his loved ones. It was just another day on the job, but it was a harsh reminder of the complexities of our immigration system and the human cost of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. I remember the days that followed like they were etched in my mind. The investigation was ongoing, and every shred of evidence, every witness statement, and every lead was being meticulously examined. I'd been involved in my fair share of cases, but this one had a different air to it. The brutality, the senselessness, it was like nothing I'd seen before. As I sat at my desk, poring over the case files, I couldn't shake the image of that little girl's face from my mind. The way her eyes seemed to stare right through me, the innocence, the fear, it was a constant reminder of why I was doing this job in the first place. To make a difference, to bring justice to those who'd been wronged. The smell of stale coffee and worn-out fluorescent lights filled the air as I worked alongside my team, trying to piece together the puzzle. We were working around the clock, fueled by a mix of adrenaline and determination. I recall the sound of keyboards clacking, the rustle of papers, and the occasional murmur of hushed conversations as we shared our findings. The evidence was mounting, but we still didn't have a clear motive. Why would someone do this? What drove them to such brutality? The questions swirled in my head like a vortex, refusing to let me sleep at night. I'd find myself replaying the crime scene in my mind, trying to find that one detail we might have missed. Next steps were crucial. We needed to track down the suspect, get them off the streets before they